Hey everyone, a little bit of a different video today. I was meaning to do a patch prediction video about 2 patches ago, kind of like highlighting what I thought changes were needed, as the previous one I did turned out to be right on the mark. I actually did successfully predict a bunch of the changes that were going to be implemented. They actually didn't go far enough in a lot of my cases where my prediction said needed to be changed, and then lo and behold, those items are still a thorn in the balancing in the game. But I do think I have a pretty good understanding, especially with exploring all the off-meta items, about why those items are not viable and why certain items that are meta are viable. And in order to balance Armor Core 6, I think what needs to happen is some global, much more dramatic and overarching changes need to be made that would really open up a lot more build variety in Armor Core 6. And I think that is the sign of a good balanced game, is when there is a plethora of viable build types rather than just the archetypes that a handful of them that have been solidified into Armored Core 6's top 100 ranked play, whether that be the PS shield with LRB and plus another weapon, call it the Etzergin, or another LRB or whatever. It doesn't really matter, a pistol. It's the same fundamental archetype on a heavy biped, or the Lammergeier missile kite, or double Etzergins on a Knockleg Alulas. There's a reason why certain parts are always featured and certain archetypes are the only ones that are viable, and I think I can explain why. So without further ado, let's jump into global changes first, and then I'll make a list of the worst offended items that are imbalanced at the end of the video. So the first global change that needs to happen is close range, medium range, and long range need to be redefined in terms of their distances. Right now, close range has far too generous of a window, and it is, especially with the jump distances of anything other than a super lightweight on Knockleg Alulas, or like the Lammergeier's, the ability to maintain perpetual range. There just is no flowing in and out of close range when you're against certain types of builds. Like a good example would be the double Zimmerman PS shield. Once they've closed the gap on you, unless you're a lightweight that has the ability to like super jump either with reverse joints or knock legs, there is no leaving close range, and that makes it really difficult for any of the other medium weight legs to have any viability. You either run super heavy with like super heavy legs and you just assault boost the whole time, or you have to be a lightweight that has to perpetually be able to keep those out of range, and the fight has no middle ground. Shortening close range to something like, I don't know, 80, I don't know the exact amount here, I'd have to play around with it and be allowed to experiment, but if they made the close range tighter to, say, 90 meters, like kind of like the pistol's effective range stat, that would allow at least the jump distances of a lot of the medium legs to create sort of natural ebb and flow in the fight, where it goes from close to medium, close to medium. And that would also help take advantage of the FCS weakness of something like the Abbott or the Acellus more. The medium range stat would also be more viable as sort of like a close range, but on the outer ranges of that distance. And then long range should fundamentally replace what is currently medium range. I don't know if even 200 meters is a bit too far, but I think that around 200 meters ought to be the long range stat, because that kind of is the range right now where weapons are functionally operating anyways, unless they have just a crazy effective range stat that allows you to snipe a charge shot like the Poisson. But yeah, the tightening up those windows would give long range finally a place, and medium range would be what is just outside the jump distances, would be just inside those jump distances of some of the medium weight biped legs. So a related global change that also ties into the range interactions in the game that I think needs to be looked at is the deflect formula for weapon types based on their effective and ideal range. If you don't already know this, the way that weapons work here is you'll get chip damage once you start deflecting on an opponent. Now that is a formula based on their resistances to your attack type, so if you're using kinetic or energy, and also the weapon's effective range. From my testing, I don't think ideal range has any impact on this, and that's unfortunate. Currently, it just seems to be a rough formula of around 1200 resistances. I think you shave off around, it's either plus 5% or you lose 15% of your range. But it doesn't really matter. The long and short of it is that it's too generous. The weapon types that are really illustrating this would be things like the Zimmermans and the Etzogens. Those weapons, when you're fighting somebody that's like a medium weight biped with, call it 1200 resistances, which is pretty high, there is no real meaningful deflect going on because you're not a super lightweight able to make deflects at the extreme ranges that are required to make it happen, and your resistances fundamentally aren't contributing that much other than AP. But in this game, stagger punish fundamentally is the win condition for PvP. So that's a bit, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but the truth really is that medium weights aren't tanky enough to justify their mobility in this game. And a big reason for that is that weapons like Etzogens can hit as far as assault rifles. And Zimmermans, even if you do successfully jump backwards and predict their QB direction and you create as much space as possible, the Zimmerman still hits you. And that is taking away a lot of the incentive to having those resistances, but without going to the extreme of becoming like a super heavy biped. So this is also causing a lot of the weapon types to overlap and taking away the niches that ought to exist. So for example, because the Etzogens don't deflect at, call it 200 meters, especially like when you're chasing them and they're backpedaling, they get pseudo bonus range. The Etzogens are fundamentally working like assault rifles, which, because they have better stats and are cheaper and are lighter, they replace the assault rifles in most cases on builds that ought to be incentivized to use those over the Etzogens. So tackling or rebalancing the formula to make resistances more impactful on deflects would be a major change that's needed. And then secondly, in a related aspect, I think that ideal range ought to be averaged into that formula as well. What this would do is create a pseudo armor piercing niche within weapon classes. So like the closer your ideal range is to your effective range, it would be able to be more resilient against higher resistances and allow that range to shine a bit further. Whereas other weapon types might have better on paper impact per second stats than like some of those other ones, but if they have high resistances, you're going to have to get even closer to make those stats start to appear and start to like perform. So here's a good example as well. So like Etzogens, because they're so steady fire and reliable, they should have worse ideal range and reasonable effective range to still make them shine over the pistols niche. However, if you want to have a weapon that can attack tanks, heavy bipeds, and still maintain really generous space, well, you should sacrifice some of the stats of impact per second in order to get the ability to keep those weapons performing at a little bit further of a range. That is the sort of change I would make in terms of resistances. Just off the top of my head, highlighting a couple of examples that would really shine from this. Well, pistols would be extremely high performance at close range, call it like the 90-meter range. Etzogens would then become a little bit of a drop-off in impact and cumulative impact per second. However, they would be able to functionally operate up to 130, 150 meters. Then you'd have things like the assault rifle starting to shine once you exceed 150. That would be the Kite's weapon choice, like a bested slot. They give up some stats, but they take advantage of their speed in order to draw the fight out longer, and they need to factor in that deflects become a problem if they don't run at least one assault rifle in order to allow that chip, to get through that chip window and start steadily refreshing the impact window. But it would come at a cost. You'd have to give up some impact per second. Laser weapons, as they're pure DPS, those should also be very generous at the longer ranges. Also, because each weapon class tends to have like three options, like you got 3 SMGs, you got 3 pistols, you got etc. Within each class, you could also make one weapon specialize more in damage, one specialize more in accumulative impact, and one specialize more in burst impact. And each of those niches ought to be clearly defined within a weapon class. So like if you're going to take the burst impact pistol, for example, the Ducat, where when you land a shot, you basically get a 2-for-1 for a brief window. Well, that should mean that the other pistol is better at accumulative impact. And that is the case with the Coquillette. And then the Sampu is quote unquote should be in damage per second when you factor in reload. But I think for the pistols, given their such impact specialization, I think I like what they did already for the pistols, which was that the sand boosts have better projectile speed. They've become more reliable against lightweights. That's another way they could do it. I think that that's a pretty specific example though, where it could become a problem with things like assault rifles, where if projectile speed is much better, then it might just end up replacing some of the longer term weapons, or sorry, the longer range weapons outright. So in general, I think damage, impact, and accumulative impact's the better way to delineate each weapon within a class. But there are a couple examples where projectile speed could be implemented to create an interesting niche without making it overpowered. And in a running trend, the next change is also going to tie into these changes. And you'll find this is true for all of my global recommendations, because they all sort of come together in order to prevent any one aspect from being abusable, in order to sort of take advantage of an imbalance. I mean. And the next thing is projectile speed. So one thing that is related to effective range that is not well balanced right now in this game is weapon types that have longer ranges ought to have higher projectile speeds as well. And I mean, this goes for non-firing stance weapons, bazookas and charge attacks aside. If your weapon does not require you to hold still, but it has a longer effective range, like laser rifles, assault rifles, linear rifles, those weapons ought to be the best in slot for projectile speeds. And this is true with the Harris right now. It's actually good that the Harris has a higher projectile speed. The Curtis not having it was actually a major oversight, and just is holding it back. But assault rifles should not be overshadowed by the Exogen, for example. It's another major problem. If a weapon is functionally meant to operate at a further range, it needs to have the projectile speed to keep up with that range, even against lightweights. So while lightweights ought to be able to shrug off more of these shots, assuming it's got like a full auto fire rate, they should still be getting hit by at least some of the hits, no matter how perfectly they move, unless they're QBing or QB spamming. Like, there should be some reliability for those weapons. And again, I'm going to use the Exogen a lot just because it's the most clear example that everybody understands. But the Exogen's projectile speed is why it was outclassing the other SMGs before. Even though you might argue that the stats on paper of the Ludlow were better, it didn't matter, because what matters is how many of your shots hit. And if you're missing even 1/10 of your shots, that's a 10% reduction in the listed on paper stats, and projectile speed mitigates that issue. So I think that the Exogens need to be toned down to where, maybe even less than the assault rifles are now, and the assault rifles need a major buff between the linear rifles and the SMGs. There should be a sweet spot in between those two. Laser weapons definitely should have very high projectile speed, because they aren't impact build-up weapons, and this would really open up the opportunity for DPS weapons to have a place. Currently, there's very few builds that are viable that don't focus on having a stagger or build in some way to where like the stagger is used. Like even a Lambergeier kite still uses the stagger, even though it's not their primary focus, and they're mostly DPS. What they are looking to do is just stagger you to regain space, like get enough impact build up so that when they hit you with the hammer, they can stagger you and then reestablish space. But pure DPS is not really a major build opportunity in the game. There are some, especially with shields, but it's just not nearly as open as it ought to be. So projectile speed needs to be recalibrated and allow the weapon's effective ranges to really dictate the projectile speed. There should be much more direct correlation in this game with projectile speed, and definitely bring down a lot of the weapons that are meant to be close range but having high projectile speed. That makes no sense. But granted, the deflect formula, if they make that change as well, that would help lessen the impact of that being a problem, and it could feasibly make it so that you could have weapons like the Exogens having higher projectile speed as long as they're deflecting if they're too far, and then it mostly just becomes this weapon is the most reliable against lightweights, quote unquote, niche within that given weapon class, because it'll hit them more reliably. So depends on if they implement that change as well in terms of what will be permissible and what won't. So again, another related change. The accumulative impact and burst impact ratios for the weapon classes in this game are wildly off kilter. So they're weapons ought to have to choose what they're going to specialize in. So a good example, I think, or at least the most clear example right now, is Zimmermans that are sort of taking advantage of the lack of balancing in this case. Zimmermans are the best-in-class non-firing stance weapon for burst impact. The Sweet 16s lack the range in order to be able to take advantage in the same way the Zimmermans do. But the thing about the Zimmermans is that with two of them, you can hit 1200 burst impact if you land a salvo, and it happens immediately. There's no time required, which means that as soon as you do your shot, you can immediately start shielding or shuffling with assault boost, making yourself basically like dramatically improving your own defense and your resistance to other weapon types. The problem is that they have 360 accumulative impact each, which means that if you land two of them, you've effectively landed a majestic shot in accumulative impact, which means that in 2 seconds after your first shot, which can happen immediately, you now can stagger some of the most common medium weight biped builds outright. This should not be the case. So you should have to choose what your weapon type is going to specialize in. And the Zimmermans need a major reduction in accumulative impact for this reason. I think that the Zimmermans, if you're going to be able to hit 1200 burst impact, the accumulative impact is going to decide how many salvos you need to land in order to actually stagger builds. Right now it's roughly 2, which means 2 seconds it takes to stagger a medium biped if you land both shots. But if we reduce that accumulative impact all the way down to, say, 50, or I don't know, yeah, I think honestly 50 or 100, somewhere in that window is the sweet spot. Whereas the Haldeman could maybe be the better accumulative impact shotgun. It does need a lift in impact, mind you. Like, I think that 360 is too low for a shotgun when things like the Harris hit for 285. That doesn't make sense. But I think the Haldeman could use a lift to maybe like 450, so that two of them can hit 700. But maybe the base impact becomes, I don't know, I think 280 is actually is not too far off, I think. But the point is, the Zimmermans should need to, I don't know what the right amount is, you guys could pick your own value here, but let's say, how many salvos should you need to land in order to stagger a medium weight biped? I'd say 6, honestly, because I think if you want to specialize in double Zimmermans for burst impact with 0 focus on accumulative impact because you want to have a shield and a missile, well, then your build should arguably be more focused on just damaging them with the Zimmermans rather than getting to take advantage of burst staggers, because you've invested so much on defense having a shield and nothing on accumulative impact. Other than maybe a missile, but that's really not an accumulative impact specialization. That's more of a long-range pressure tool. That would actually open up some incentives. You'd want to pair a Zimmerman with, say, a pistol, or you'd want to pair a Zimmerman with SMGs or assault rifles, etc. It would encourage you to blend your weapon types a bit more, and you could still go for staggers, but maybe now you want to give up the shield so you can have an accumulative impact tool as well, like the Shao Wei or something. The point here is that the Zimmermans being paired with shields offers most builds 0 or very little time to actually mount their own offense, because if the Zimmerman's not shooting, then they're shuffling or shielding, and that doesn't really give you the ability to make longer, fire over time weapons time to perform as you ought to be able to have. So Zimmermans are the clearest example. Some other examples, though, there's definitely like charged laser shots do a lot of impact in this game when lasers are supposed to be damage. I do think that probably needs to be toned down a little bit. Yeah, like looking at assault rifles, the longer range weapons ought to have a higher accumulative impact ratio, and relative to their burst impact ratios, they should be basically, if a weapon fires over time, it should be more focused on building up impact rather than bursting impact to stagger outright. And you'd have to blend your weapons to have a little bit of both if you'd like, or you just hope for accumulative impact steadily and then eventually trigger the stagger and reestablish base, which is what kites would like. This is also another reason why non-IG shielding is so useless, and it's also why shields are so useless against kites in general, because those weapons have 2-to-1 ratios, and most shields non-IG hovers around the 2-to-1 ratio, like 50% reduction. This means that if you try to shield things like exigents outside the IG window, or pistols, you effectively don't really reduce the accumulative impact you're taking. It just shaves off the window of impact, like that sort of like spike you get before it decays. But that's not really that useful in this game because even accumulative impact happens pretty quickly. So I think that having something closer to like a I don't know, a 1 to 1.2 or 1 to 1.25 ratio would make those non-IG shielding windows somewhat useful against those builds, and would make it so that you don't just outright have to purge your shield whenever you're against the kite, because you're never going to need it. Now you might actually be able to keep the shield up and bunny hop them into the corner of the map, and that would still have, while you would take some accumulative impact, it wouldn't be so much to make it such that the chase down is now going to be completely hopeless. So yeah, those ratios being tweaked across the boards need to happen. And even within given weapon classes, I think specializing one for impact, one for accumulative impact, one for, I don't know, call it damage or projectile speed, would, again, open up more interesting build variety there. So moving away from weapon types now, what about the general AP amounts in the game? So I do think that fights can be over way too quickly currently, and I think that this is also making such a hyper focus on the expansions. So, and like who wins the stagger race? If you lose, basically if you lose the first stagger race, have to pop your expansion first, you're at a massive disadvantage and the fight is almost already over. I think that if AP levels were increased such that there was 2 stages to a fight, there was winning the expansion race, but there was still enough AP left over to survive the stagger punish of most weapons, except for something like the chainsaw, maybe. Or like even the bunker, I think is probably deserving to not be an outright kill in this case. I think if there's enough AP left over, that the first expansion race puts you in a significantly better place, but there was still a reasonable chance to win at the second stage of the fight, which was where there is no stagger, escaping the next stagger punish, but there was enough AP to survive sort of chip damage. Then we could create better. We could create a better separation of just damage weapons, impact build-up weapons, and stagger punish levels within the different weapon classes. Something else that also is kind of annoying is that a lot of this highest stagger punish weapons, they don't really get the opportunity to flex their damage, because something like the Pulse Blade is still a two stagger punish kill against the vast majority of mechs. Maybe not against tanks, but there just really isn't a incentive to run something like the Slicer in most cases, as you're more likely, because here's just a hypothetical situation. Let's say you're fighting like a medium weight, you win the first stagger race, you're going to get in 1 Pulse Blade slash before their armor pops most of the time. You're going to pop your armor, then they're not going to have enough AP left over to survive the next stagger punish, so if you get that, you're going to end up deleting them anyways. But that has no difference with a Slicer, where you're not going to get in a slash. They're going to pulse armor your Slicer the first time, and then the next time your Slicer does enough damage to outright kill them, because it has a bigger punish in total. But you can see there's just a lack of real separation in some of those higher direct hit punish weapons. And it's another reason that the chainsaw is just so not worth ever taking, just because it's not fundamentally its time to kill is not fundamentally much faster against the overwhelming majority of mechs, that it really just becomes a tank killer only, and that's just not enough of a niche to make the weapon ever really worth the cost of bringing it along. So yeah, I don't know if it's double, but there does need to be an increase, I think, in the time to kill, and also enough that there is a second stage in the fight where the expansion is not the be-all and end-all of the race, and would allow more opportunities as well in order to chase down kites. Like Lammergeiers just don't ever really have to worry about getting their energy back, because most of the time the fight is over. If they have to lose their energy, that's rarely more than once, and the opponent usually just does not have enough attempts to actually justify the win, and try to like gap close enough times. I think tanks definitely are in a pretty good place already. They would need to go up correspondingly, but not the same amount. I think that tanks, if we increase medium weights, for example, by 50%, I think tanks only needed maybe a 20% increase to them. But that's again just sort of a minor, tweaking detail that could be debated and balanced around. But I think the core global issue here is that time to kill is too fast in this game. And it just creates this huge focus on either hyper distance maintaining or hyper rushdown focusing, and and then the fight is just over with one mistake on lightweights a little bit too easily. that I think this is hurting a lot of like the Nakalula build types from ever really wanting to entertain builds that could get a bit closer. It's just creating a missile-focused sort of chip rifle evasion style, and that's fine. But it would be nice if they opened up some build variety and gave enough AP to those builds to, you know, potentially survive a smaller stagger punish after the expansion is over. Okay, let's tie into expansions now. So there is a fundamental imbalance in the expansions in the game currently. Assault Armor is the most egregious example in terms of just like the values being wrong, and then Pulse Protection is probably the most egregious in terms of just general duration and like implementability. So I want to mention Assault Armor first because it has the most complex interactions. So the issues with Assault Armor are A, it doesn't do enough impact. It needs to do 3,000. And the big reason for that is the fact that every mech in the game can counter Assault Armor with Assault Boost teching, which is where you activate Assault Boost and mitigate the impact of it down to 1,400, which means most mechs do not get staggered upon Assault Armor. And this is an issue because it means that Assault Armor means that if you win the stagger race and they attack it, they get to stagger you most of the time, depending on their weapon payloads, but most of the time they're going to get to stagger punish you, even though you won the stagger race. Just to highlight a good example of this, or actually before I jump ahead to that, tanks ought to be able to assault boost deck Assault Armor. Right? Now that would create an incentive for builds to only use Assault Armor when they think they've exhausted the tank's energy and they can't actually get away with securing the Assault Boost tech. But here's a good example of why Assault Armor is imbalanced. Take, for example, two close range builds that have a melee punish. So it doesn't matter if they're pistols or double melee or whatever. The point is that if you win the stagger race, you're going to have some measure of impact built up. Call it, like, let's say you did really well and you're only at 1,500 impact or whatever. When they activate Assault Armor, their impact is going to be refreshed back down to 0 because they're in direct hit punish, and you can't build up impact when you're doing direct hit punish. And they've waited till they got staggered, so their impact has been reset to 0. They activate Assault Armor. If you try to counter it, you're not going to be in direct hit, which means their Assault Armor is going to max your bar out without staggering you, basically making you 1 impact away from getting staggered. And you can Assault Boost tech it, but you still end up getting re-staggered most of the time because you're going to have too much impact to even absorb 1,400. So in short, if it's two Assault Armor users versing each other, if you lose the stagger race, you're actually going to be in the best position because your impact's refreshed. You activate Assault Armor, they try to counter yours. You'll take damage, but they will be one tap for being staggered, which means that you can shoot them with any weapon, and then you get a free stagger punish set up, even though you lost the stagger race. Okay, so how do we counter this from the other side? Well, there isn't a true counter, but the best inputs you can do is to let their Assault Armor stagger you, even though you lost the stagger race. You can then pop your Assault Armor, but or choose not to, but the problem with this is that if they don't go in for a melee punish, if they have something like the Oscillator or whatever, anything range, bazookas, all that double shoulder lasers, the problem is they get to punish you with it. Which then begs the question, well, what use is my Assault Armor against anyone else using Assault Armor if I'm winning the stagger race? And the answer is pretty hard to justify, especially if they have a shield, because then they can parry it on top. That's the other problem with Assault Armor, is that it's also parryable with shields. So questions really, why ever run Assault Armor? So increase the impact. I do think that making it come out a little bit quicker so that even when somebody Assault Armors you, if you could just pop yours so that they didn't have time to escape it and do a ranged punish on you, that would be another way to sort of tweak Assault Armor, making it so that you still win with perfect inputs. But like I said, currently the highest, I think, the most complex interaction with Assault Armor versus Assault Armor users is the player who wins the stagger race triggers the other opponent's Assault Armor, they let it stagger them, and then the other opponent tries to go in for their melee punish, and then you pop your Assault Armor and stagger them. Problem is that if the other person knows this, then they will just not go in for the melee punish. Even though they lost the stagger race, they'll just direct hit punish you at range, especially if they have weapons like the Coral Oscillator, then they can go in for the punish at range, or like bazookas. that doesn't really make sense. And I think a way you could fix that too would be to make it so that Assault Armor also refreshes your stagger, like Pulse Armor does. It just doesn't give you the shield. And that would be good enough. Honestly, you still take damage when you're doing the Assault Armor because you're not moving, but you would refresh your impact, and it would create a bit more of a balance in those types of interactions. So what about Pulse Armor? I think Pulse Armor is already best in class for the most part. The only thing I'm not sure of if it's sensible is the fact that it drops you. If they make it that Assault Armor gets rid of your impact though, then I think that's fine. Then having Pulse Armor, as long as you're activating it in the air, making it so you can't be Assault Armored reliably, that's totally fine. And I think that it would put them roughly in an equal position where, okay, you've dodged their Pulse Armor, they've missed their Assault Armor, but you're both reset to 0 impact. However, the Pulse Armor person now has a little bit of a shield to give them a lead in advance. So that would be reasonable for lightweights, I think. If they don't make it so that Assault Armor gets rid of impact, then I don't think Pulse Armor should be dropping aerial builds. It makes it just so that Assault Armor is flat out class against Pulse Armor, and that doesn't really make sense. As for Pulse Protection, I don't think it should get deleted with Assault Armor, for one, because Pulse Protection is already very easily kiteable. Like you could just fly away and wait out its duration. I think if they increase the duration of Pulse Protection dramatically, I don't know exactly what the amount is. Let's say it lasts 1 minute. It might be a little boring if people decide just to kite it out, but it would make it so that the match timer is now a more looming threat. If they've got the AP lead and you just try to time out the Pulse Protection, then you're not going to have enough time to try to get the health lead back, and that would be a way to make Pulse Protection a little bit more durable and more of like a match. Like I think Pulse Protection should almost be the expansion that you activate before you're ever stagger built up, or at least very little stagger built up, and it creates a strong time pressure in the match too as well. Like if you don't pressure them, then you're not going to have much time to have the opportunity to later. So yeah, that's how I would tweak Pulse Protection. Make it last a lot longer. Don't let it get deleted by Assault Armor. In fact, arguably, I think that deleting Pulse Protection at all, Pulse Protection at all shouldn't even really be a thing. It should be almost like a piece of gear that you activate and find the first stage of the map, of the fight, and helps you pressure them with AP leads, and makes you should be disincentivized from just flying away from Pulse Protection is kind of my point. Then as for Terminal Armor, I don't think anything really needs to change with Terminal Armor. Seems to be like they've dialed in the duration quite well. It might be a little too short now. Maybe going between where it used to be and where it is now would be a little bit better, because I do feel like Terminal Armor is quite easy to escape from. But maybe that would all be addressed with the projectile speed changes anyways, and allowing them to poke opponents that try to fly away a little bit better. So that remains to be seen, I guess. So that's the global changes that I think need to occur. I'm just going to list off a couple of very obvious issues, and I'm sure I'm missing a lot of them. I probably mentioned others in my previous videos, just like where I was sort of commentating about like issues in certain parts. But here's a couple obvious ones that need to be fixed, and a lot of them have to do with animations, especially melee in this game. So like the lance grab is a bit unreliable. You can actually Q beat out of the lance if you take the charge attack. That needs to be fixed. The VPPS shield needs another reduction in deploy count. It's got near max cooling, and that currently doesn't even need to be used. That shield is almost unoverwhelmable right now, and it's outclassing other shields because of that. It needs to be reduced by 1 and make it so that the opponent has to try to have some breathing room in order to take in some cooling before they can keep spamming the deploys. The Coral Blade, its light slash needs to be sped up just a little bit, because currently you can't even stagger punish off of a punch extension with it because the opponent has time to deploy the shield on wake up. So that should be just fast enough to make it so that they can't do that. That is just a weird delay and weird interaction that occurs with the Coral Blade. The Aorta generator. This thing is flat out classed by the NGI, and for no apparent reason, and it's also flat out classed by the 20C generator, which gives you 1200 energy, but in only about 1 second from redline, whereas the Aorta gives you 2000, but after 4 seconds plus a little bit of change. The Aorta should be a hybrid between the NGI generator and the 20C. It gives you a bit more aerial, and it has somewhere in between in terms of the EN recharge delay. Yes, it's slightly lighter, but there is no reason to ever justify that tiny weight difference for a 4-second EN recharge delay over a 1-second one. So I would say putting this thing at about 2 seconds, maybe 2.25 for the EN recharge delay is the base, would be a nice place for the aorta. It would create a really interesting permaflight build that isn't too vulnerable after expending their energy in the air, which is a very expensive situation to be in when you're in the air anyways. I also think that the 2000 capacity is too little. Maybe increasing this to 20, I don't know, 22, or maybe, you know what, maybe even closer to 3000, like 2500. That would also be, I think that the aorta should be a very interesting generator for the Lammergeier, because you kind of split the difference between capacity and the ability to get your energy back currently. Which also brings me to the Lammergeier legs. The Lammergeier legs do not drain energy in hover mode even still near fast enough, and right now there's just one generator that everybody uses, which is the Coral Gen. I think that having to make a better sort of dilemma, like, okay, do I focus more on protecting myself when I need to get my energy back, or do I just go full tilt, full capacity, and be vulnerable during that window? That should be more viable, leaning it towards protecting yourself during the energy regeneration phase. It would also make other generators more interesting and more build types more interesting for the Lammergeier, rather than just run away and missile kite the whole time, which is very boring. And nobody likes playing those types of builds anyways, and losing to it feels a little cheesy, where it's like, wow, this is just not a fun fight to even participate in. I think that doubling the Lammergeier's energy drain from where it used to be, it's been sped up a little bit, but like, call it like splitting the difference, I guess more like 70% faster now, or sorry, like 40% faster, I guess is what I meant to say. That would make it so that the Lammergeier is dealing with more vulnerability windows where they have to drop and let the energy come back. It would also encourage more Lammergeier builds that play closer to the ground rather than always using the Coral Gen. These would be really helpful changes to the Lammergeier legs and open up more build viability. The orbiter core is flat out classed by the Firmeza, so that needs to have a niche. You could pick what you want to focus on, whether it be EN recharge delay being a little bit better. Obviously, you don't want to get too close to the Alba core, but yeah, right now it's just flat out classed by the Firmeza, so that needs to be fixed. The jammer is well overdue for reworking. I do think that the jammer as a defensive tool, similar to a shield, needs to be a shoulder weapon. Having to factor in weapon swaps into it is taking away a lot of the different viable ways you could take advantage of the jammer's ability to force builds into close range, and also taking away missiles. But yeah, having it as a weapon part is, or sorry, as a hand part is, it's just not sensible for defensive tools, because I don't want to have to give up my offense in order to use a defense tool, especially in a game this centric on impact buildup. So yeah, jammer replace. Also, another thing too, I think that there should be a small time delay before either person can reestablish lock once they've been spoofed. So maybe call it a 2-second window would be nice, just to create a little bit of an ability to use the smoke to help them lose track. The problem right now is, even if you're like a reverse joint lightweight, if you smoke them and then you jump, their hard lock, like if they're in the smoke with you, their hard lock is going to reacquire by the time you jump, and it's going to flick their camera up and tell them where you went. And yeah, that just needs to be addressed. So if an opponent is flying towards me, assault boosting, I pop the smoke, they get into the smoke just before I jump, which is going to happen most of the time, they're going to know exactly where I went to because of the camera flick. And now if they got smoked and they didn't get their hard lock as soon as they flew into the smoke with me, then when I jumped or QB to the side, they wouldn't have their camera flicking in the direction that I went, and that would actually make the smoke a little bit more tricky and more mind game capable. Another really good example would be the stun baton. So the stun baton's animations are too long, especially the charge attack. I think the charge attack should come out at the same way that the light pulse blade does, as currently it's very difficult to ever make that thing land. Like if you've seen my stun baton specific build challenge video, I talk more about it as to why. Also, the light lunge is just not really that useful. The stun baton is very hard to justify over the dagger just because of its unreliability issues, and it's very hard to ever take advantage of its unique tech, which is this charge attack allowing a burst of impact. It might be worth just making like a couple of specific changes that need to happen for sure. You should not be able to block the stun baton's delayed detonation if you already took the charge attack. So right now, if you take a stagger punish charge attack stun baton, if you deploy your shield, you'll block the detonation even though it's planted on your mech, not on the shield. So that needs to be fixed as well. I'm surprised that one hasn't, to be honest. So yeah, stun baton needs some work largely in its animations, not so much in its stats as they've been tweaking lately. The Alula booster is also in major need of a nerf, primarily to its passive boost speed. So the Alula is meant to be the offensive close quarters booster that is used to like be highly evasive on lightweights and dodge nukes, but is very good at closing the gap to opponents, both by combining its QB thrust and reload with jump distance, but also because it has S tier assault boost. So because the Alula has what is arguably, I mean, you can even use it on heavier weight builds, you can use the Alula sort of like a Brazel to gap close. There is no realistic way to get away from an Alula user, or at least to control the spacing. You can go up into the air is usually your strongest solution, but the Alula's assault boost does allow them to gap close briefly using assault boost, however. But because it has passive boost speed thrust that is allows them to passively dodge everything and backpedal at basically the max boost speed expectable from lightweights, which is 370 to 380, it also overlaps with the Gill's job of being the evasive booster that is meant to be more kite focused and defensive. So that is a defensive trait that needs to be nixed. I think that reducing it to roughly the Flugel's passive boost speed, like I think the Alula users should be capped at around 350, so that when they're backpedaling, the most they can expect is to be suffering the 30 meter per second penalty, bringing them to about 320. If you want to play a highly evasive kiting style, then you should be running the Gills, both for the upward thrust capability, but you have to sacrifice the assault boost ability to force gap closing against any builds, unless they're like heavier builds. So yeah, the Alula is eating up the Gills at the moment and needs to be nerfed on thrust. Another item, the Napalm launcher, is far too unreliable and basically does nothing against lightweights, so I think speeding up the projectile speed to be similar to how a shotgun works would give it a bit more niche, or at least the charge attack should function like a shotgun, and it should not build up as much flame as the regular like ground version, but I think just making it so that the charge attack gives you some sort of viability against lightweights, or even just reverse those two, maybe just the uncharged. Yeah, maybe the uncharged works against lightweights but doesn't build up as much flame, and the charge attack is the one that puts it on the ground, would give the flamethrower some more viability against build types other than just tanks. Because yeah, unfortunately, a lot of the fight in this game takes place in the air, and the napalm does nothing in the air for the most part. Speeding up its projectile speed in that charge attack is definitely warranted, and also, and its like straight shot should be warranted, because lightweights you're not going to ever land anything if you can't actually land it. And also the firing time should be dramatically reduced. I don't think that having that long firing animation makes sense. As well as I would also get rid of the massive recoil that it has. This, again, taking away your offense to use this tool is costing way too much as is. Okay, so and with that, that's pretty much all the time I think I want to dedicate to just making notes on the patch. There's a lot more items that definitely need work that I could go into the individual animations, but I think focusing just on the generalized changes is kind of what Fromsoft really needs to focus on, as balancing Armored Core is not going to be done by just tweaking some impact values and tweaking some accumulative impact values, tweaking the projectile speeds of a couple of weapons. Really, the only way to fix this game would be to address each of the, like all of these, in one major patch. And if they don't figure it out, I do worry that Armored Core 6 is probably just better off getting a new Armored Core rather than trying to patch it if they're not going to address it in a meaningful way. It's just a waste of everyone's time. So here's hoping that they catch up and figure out what we all hopefully already know about the game's balancing.